In this example, we're using the exclusive OR operator for our two conditions. So I want you to look over the code and tell me what the output is going to be here. So let's evaluate our expressions, and they're pretty much the same as we had before, but just as a reminder, since x is -2, x less than or equal to 2 is going to be true. And then we need to check the second condition. Since y is 1, y greater than 0 is true. So we have true, exclusive, or true, and since according to the way exclusive or works, only one, exactly one, can be true for the whole thing to be true, therefore this is going to be false. Therefore we skip the then portion of our statement, and we're going to store the current value of x, which is -2. Therefore our output is going to be -2. Here we're still using exclusive OR, except now we've changed our conditions a little bit. We have x greater than 2 and y greater than 0. So I want you to tell me what is going to be the output of this code. So let's evaluate the first condition. We have x greater than 2, and since x is -2, this is going to be false because -2 is not greater than +2. And then we need to check our second condition, the y greater than 0. Since y is 1, y greater than 0 is true. So here we have false, exclusive, or true. Since exactly one of the conditions is true, that means the whole thing is true. So we will go inside the then portion of the if-then statement, set x to 100. So that means we're going to store 100 in our label text. Therefore, the output is going to be 100. In this example, it's actually very similar to the last one. We're still using exclusive OR. The difference is we changed the second condition. We're now checking if y is greater than 2. So take a look at it and see if you can determine the output of this code. Well, the first condition isn't different from the previous one. So we're comparing -2 with 2. So x greater than 2 is going to be false. So now we need to check the y greater than 2. Since y is 1, y is not greater than 2. Therefore, y greater than 2 is going to be false. So we have false, exclusive, or false, which means the whole thing is false. We skip the x equals 100 line. So we're going to store -2 in our label text. Therefore, the output is going to be -2. Now we'll change it up just a little bit. So we're going to be using the if-then-else statement, and we're using a couple different operators. So take a look over this code and see if you can tell me what the output's going to be. So we have that x is initially -2, so we need to check our first condition, that x greater than or equal to 0. We find this is going to be false because -2 is not greater than or equal to 0. So we're going to go down to the else portion and execute the x equals x char 2 line. So that means we're taking x and squaring it and storing it back into x. So what's -2 squared? Well, we find that's going to be +4. So we store that into x, convert that to a string, and then store that in our label text. So this means that our output is going to be 4. Here is the same example from before. The only difference is we initialize x to 0 instead of -2. So look over the code and see if you can determine what the output is going to be. So we need to check the first condition. So we're checking if 0 is greater than or equal to 0, which is going to be true because 0 does equal 0. So we're going to execute the then portion of our statement. So we're going to set x to be 1 minus x. Well, 0 is x is 0. So 1 minus 0 is going to be 1. Therefore, we convert the 1 to a string. So our label text is going to contain 1. So our output's going to be 1. In this example, we use the AND operator in our condition. So now we're combining the logical operators with the if-then-else statement. So take a look at the code and see if you can tell me what the output is. So since we're dealing with the AND operator, we need to check both conditions to make sure they're true in order for the whole thing to be true. So we start with x greater than or equal to 0. Since x is 0, this is true. X is greater than or equal to 0 because 0 is greater than or equal to 0. Now let's check the second condition. So we need to check that x is less than or equal to 2. Well, since x is 0, 0 is going to be less than or equal to 2, so this is also true. Therefore, we have true and true. That's going to be true, which means we go into the then portion of our statement, and we're going to set x to be x plus 2. Well, x is 0, and 0 plus 2 is 2. So at this point, x is 2. So we go to the end of our code, store 2 in our label, and our output is going to be 2. Here we have the same code, except x is initially 1 instead of 0. So take a look at it and see if you can tell me what the output's going to be. So we need to check both conditions again. So is 1 greater than or equal to 0? Yes, it is. So that part is going to be true. So now we need to check if 1 is less than or equal to 2. Well, that's also true. So we have true and true again. So that's going to be true. So we go back into the then portion of our if statement. So we're going to set x to be x plus 2. Since x is 1, we're going to have 1 plus 2, which is 3. So we store that into x. We convert that to a string and store it in our text portion of our label. So the output is going to be 3. Now we'll take the same code from before, but change the initialization. So x is now going to be initially 3 instead of 1. So how is this going to affect our output? Well, let's evaluate both of our conditions to see if they're true. So is 3 greater than or equal to 0? Yes. So x greater than or equal to 0 is going to be true. Now we need to check if 3 is less than or equal to 2. Well, it's not. So x less than or equal to 2 is false. So we have true and false. And since both have to be true for the whole thing to be true, we have false. Now we're going to go into the else portion of our if then else statement. And we're going to set x to x minus 2. X is 3, so 3 minus 2 is 1. So we store 1 into x. We convert that to a string. We put that in our label. So that means our output is going to be 1. We'll now take the same code as before, except we're going to use the OR operator instead of the AND operator. So with this change, take a look at the code and see if you can determine the output. X is still 3, and we need to check both conditions. So is 3 greater than or equal to 0? Yes, it still is. So x greater than or equal to 0 is true. Is 3 less than or equal to 2? Well, from the last slide, we know that's not true, so that's false. So we have true or false, and according to OR, at least one of them has to be true, which is the case here. So the whole thing is true. So we're going to go into the then portion of our if then else statement. We're going to take x, which is 3, add 2 to it. So 3 plus 2 is 5. That gets stored into x. We convert that to a string, store that in the text portion of our label. So our output is going to be 5.